It started with a voicemail, static in the background, a stuttering voice, barely coherent. Elise, don't trust them. The key, it's not in the drawer. It's the fourth, not second. Remember the... Click. That was it. The message that turned Elise Marrow's stomach upside down and sent her spinning through a week that would unravel 29 years of believing her family was whole, loving, and honest. Her father, Andrew Marrow, had passed 3 days before. A quiet stroke in his sleep. The kind people call peaceful. But grief didn't come to Elise like waves. It came as a riddle, cryptic, cold, and sharp-edged. Elise sat on the edge of the guest room bed in her childhood home, holding her phone, replaying the voicemail over and over. Her hand trembled as she looked around the room that hadn't changed in over a decade. Same brown dresser, faded pink curtains, a picture of her and her siblings, Will and Sophie, on the nightstand. She stared at it longer than she meant to. That voicemail wasn't an accident. Her father meant for her to find something they had kept from her. The next morning, the family lawyer, Mr. Devane, arrived to read the will. Everyone gathered in the sunroom, the air heavy with silent tension. Her mother, Meredith, perched elegantly in the armchair as if hosting a book club, not a legal reading of her husband's legacy. Sophie, the golden child, sat close to their mother. Her soft smile was too tight, too knowing. And Will, quiet, stiff, always the one with secrets in his eyes, stood by the fireplace, arms folded. Mr. Devane cleared his throat and began. To my beloved wife, Meredith, I leave our estate in full, including all assets therein. To my son, William, I leave the lakeside cabin and its contents. To my daughter, Sophie, I leave the vineyard in Santa Rosa. And to Elise... He paused. Elise's heart raced. I leave my personal journals and the collection of photographs stored in the attic box labeled December. The silence that followed was deafening. Elise blinked. Photographs? Journals? No land? No house? No money? She felt her face flush as her mother placed a hand on Sophie's knee and gave a soft, patronizing smile. Your father was sentimental about those things, Meredith said gently. He always said you were the emotional one. The words stabbed. Elise nodded, excused herself politely, and walked straight to the attic. The attic smelled like dust and long-forgotten family memories. She pulled down the ladder, climbed slowly, and switched on the dim overhead bulb. Boxes lined the wooden beams. Christmas, Halloween, kid stuff. She found the one marked December tucked behind an old wardrobe. Inside were dozens of photos, envelopes, and 3 thick, leather-bound journals. She opened one at random. The handwriting was unmistakably her father's. Looped, careful, almost elegant. March 12th, 2010. I watched Meredith hand the envelope to Sophie today. The contract for the vineyard was signed in my name, but I was never told. I didn't sign. Meredith and Sophie said it was what was best, that Elise was too naive to manage it. Her breath caught. She flipped pages frantically. April 8th, 2011. I wanted to tell Elise everything this morning. I left her breakfast and thought I might, but Meredith threatened to take Will away again. She said no one would believe me anyway. Page after page, lies, manipulation, forged documents. Her father had known. He'd been cornered, silent, caged by the very people now smiling in that sunroom. Elise found the 3rd journal's final entry. The key is in the 4th drawer of my old desk, not the 2nd like Meredith thinks. If Elise finds this, she'll understand what was stolen. I'm sorry. She ran to the study. Her father's desk was still there. Oak, antique, worn smooth with time. She opened the 4th drawer. There, wrapped in velvet cloth, was a small brass key and a folded letter. Elise, if you're reading this, you already know. I was weak when I should have fought. But I hid the proof where no one else could. Go to the cabin. The real deed. The documents. Everything's there. I left it in the lockbox under the floorboards. This key will open it. You are always the one with fire. Don't let them smother it. Tears slipped silently down Elise's cheeks. That night, while Meredith, Sophie, and Will toasted to a peaceful transition, Elise quietly packed a bag, tucked the key and journals into her duffel, and drove toward the lakeside cabin her father had left to Will, except it wasn't Will's. Not really. The wind howled against the windows as she reached the edge of the lake. The air smelled like pine and cold water. The cabin stood still, its wooden frame glowing under the moonlight. She stepped inside, found the living room rug, pulled it back. Her fingers dug into the grooves of the floorboard, loose, just like he said. Beneath it, a fireproof lockbox. She turned the key. The contents inside would change everything. Elise's hands trembled as the lock clicked open. Inside the box lay neatly stacked folders, a thick envelope labeled property transfer documents, and another marked medical records. Beneath them, a small, cloth-bound notebook sat alone. She reached for it slowly, the cold night air sneaking in through the window cracks and crawling across her skin. She flipped it open to the first page. Record of estate manipulation, compiled for Elise should truth one day be needed. Andrew Marrow. Her chest tightened. For years, Elise had felt like the outsider in her own family. While Sophie inherited the family's charm and confidence, Elise had been the quiet one, the artist, the one who never pushed too hard or asked for more than was offered. And Will? He had always kept his distance, never overtly cruel, but never stepping in either. Now, with the documents in front of her, everything she had quietly suspected for years started knitting into a sharp, painful truth. By candlelight, Elise read each page of her father's notebook and the attached documents. The Vineyard, left to Sophie, was originally in Elise's name, gifted by their maternal grandfather. Her mother had forged Elise's signature on a transfer document 10 years ago, claiming Elise had gifted the land to Sophie for tax purposes. The lakeside cabin, according to records hidden in this box, had a contested deed. Will's name had only appeared after a suspicious correction filed 3 months ago, right after Andrew's stroke and days before his death. The will, tampered with. One entry chilled her. Meredith cornered Devane in April, told him Elise had no stake in the family and never contributed. He looked sick, but he nodded. She always knew how to make people afraid of her. Elise's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a passive betrayal. It was premeditated, systematic, personal. Sunrise cast a gray light across the lake as Elise stared out from the cabin's deck. Her phone buzzed again. Sophie. Again. Elise, can we talk? There's something I need to explain. Elise didn't reply. She slid the phone into her jacket pocket and instead picked up the folder marked Medical Records. Inside was something unexpected. A lab result, paternity analysis, and her name in bold. Her father's name, Andrew Marrow. But the match? 0%. Elise blinked. She read it again, and then again. No, she whispered, her voice a breath in the cold air. No, this can't be real. The paper crinkled in her grip. Another file in the folder read, Adoption Record, Confidential. Elise wasn't Andrew's biological daughter. She wasn't Meredith's either. She had been adopted at 9 months old. The paperwork was dated and signed by a family court in Michigan, 5 states away from where she was raised. Another document followed, a letter. To be given to Elise only if she discovers the truth. Do not disclose otherwise. Elise, if you found this, then my silence has broken the bond I promised I'd always keep. You were not born into this family, but you were the greatest gift of my life. Meredith never wanted you. She only agreed because the board at the hospital thought it would make us look more charitable. But you became mine, my daughter in every way that mattered, and that's why I fought, even if in silence. I knew they'd never treat you like the others. I knew Meredith would twist things. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. Elise's eyes burned, and the pages blurred. Her lips trembled. I wasn't even one of them. But maybe that was the point. Maybe that's why Meredith made sure Elise never received what was rightfully hers. Why Sophie had always been given the better room, the prettier dresses, the solo vacations with their mother. It wasn't favoritism. It was exclusion masked in smiles. They never saw her as one of them. And now she had the proof. She could expose it all. That evening, Elise didn't go home. She drove 2 towns over to a small law office tucked between a diner and a laundromat. The gold-embossed letters on the window read, Dalton and Pierce, Estates and Civil Litigation. Inside, an older woman with sharp gray eyes looked up. You Elise Marrow? Elise hesitated, then nodded. I'm Olivia Dalton. Your father arranged for me to meet with you if you ever showed up with a brass key. Elise reached into her coat, pulled it out, and placed it on the table. Good, Olivia said. Then let's take everything from the top, because I think it's time your mother and siblings find out they're not as protected as they think. Back at the Marrow estate, Meredith stood by the fireplace, swirling a glass of Pinot Noir. Sophie paced nervously behind her. I told you we should have destroyed the journals, Sophie muttered. If she finds that cabin... She won't, Meredith snapped. She's too soft, always has been. Will stood at the back window, watching the driveway. She's not coming back. But in that moment, Elise was already walking into something bigger than they ever imagined. Not just revenge. Justice. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like the outsider anymore. She felt like the storm. The office was cold, quiet, and surgical in its cleanliness. Framed law degrees on the walls, fresh coffee in the corner, and a war plan forming on the table. Elise sat across from Olivia Dalton, her father's backup plan. Her hair was still messy from the drive, her coat draped across her lap like a shield. Olivia's sharp fingers flipped through each document with purpose. Elise, Olivia said, sliding a folder forward. This isn't just theft, it's fraud. What your mother did, what your sister and even your brother knew about, this could qualify as criminal conspiracy to defraud an heir. The words didn't sting anymore. They solidified something inside Elise. And the adoption? Elise asked, her voice soft but steady. Olivia's eyes narrowed. Legally, it means nothing in terms of inheritance if your name was on the deed. But Meredith used that to emotionally manipulate your father, and more importantly, you. I've seen families like this. They use shame to keep you compliant. I'm done being compliant, Elise said, pushing the journals closer to Olivia. These prove motive. My name was removed, my inheritance stolen. I want to pursue civil action. Olivia didn't blink. Good. Then here's what we'll do. 3 days later, Meredith hosted a luncheon. It was for appearances, an event to show grace, unity, and wealth. Her friends from the Country Women's League, a few minor city council wives, and even the mayor's wife gathered on the Marrow estate lawn with string quartets and champagne flutes. Sophie floated between them like a swan, graceful and rehearsed. Will hung back, drinking alone, already sweating under his linen blazer. Elise isn't here? Someone asked. She's traveling, Meredith said, lips curving upward. She was never comfortable with gatherings. Always artistic. She laughed gently, as if Elise were a child playing dress-up in a world she never belonged to. But then a black car pulled into the driveway. Elise stepped out, hair swept back, neutral-toned dress, minimal makeup, folder in hand. The whispers started before her heels touched the marble steps. Elise? Meredith's voice rang out, tight with surprise and sugar. Darling, we didn't expect you. I know, Elise said calmly. That's why I came. Will put down his glass. Sophie stiffened near the dessert table. Elise held up the folder and handed it to Meredith. Inside, a certified letter, a formal notification of intent to sue. Named defendants, Meredith Marrow, Sophie Marrow, and William Marrow. Allegations, fraud, breach of trust, wrongful transfer of deeded property, and will manipulation. What is this? Meredith hissed, her public face cracking for the first time in years. The truth, Elise said. The color drained from Sophie's face. Elise, you can't be serious. I am. This is civil, for now. Meredith took a sharp step forward, voice low. You ungrateful little girl. After everything we've done for you. You did nothing for me. Elise said, her voice like ice under pressure. You hid who I was, took what was mine, lied to my face for years and expected me to smile through it. People were watching now. Phones were out. The crowd hushed. Meredith's hand twitched as if she wanted to slap her. Sophie's lips parted like she wanted to scream. But Will didn't move. Elise, he finally said quietly, can we talk? She turned toward him. Only if you're ready to tell the truth. About the cabin, about Dad, about how long you've known. His face crumpled just slightly. Elise, he said again, voice cracking. You're right. I knew, and I was afraid. You still are. Later that evening, Elise sat alone in her tiny apartment, phone buzzing with calls from reporters. Olivia had advised her not to speak to the media yet. Instead, she opened her father's final journal again. One last note she hadn't read before, scribbled on the inside back cover. You were always the bravest, Elise, even when they tried to convince you otherwise. I wish I could have seen the woman you'd become. She clutched the book to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks, silent and soft. She wasn't done. This was just the beginning. Because justice didn't come easy, but Elise had the fourth key, and now she had the fire. The headlines hit within 48 hours. Heiress files fraud lawsuit against prominent Marrow family. Adopted daughter exposes inheritance cover-up. Fourth key journal reveals Vineyard theft. It spread faster than Elise expected. The town loved drama, especially when it involved the rich and secretly venomous. Elise's inbox exploded with media requests, distant cousins reaching out for coffee, and one email from a journalist named Declan Rhodes with the subject line, "Your father wasn't the only one who tried to fight them." She didn't open it right away. Her attention was consumed by the first court summons delivered directly to the Marrow estate. Sophie lost control first. She stormed into Olivia Dalton's office unannounced, tears running down her perfectly powdered face, accusing Elise of public humiliation, weaponizing grief, and destroying their family's legacy. Elise stayed silent until Olivia stood. Ms. Marrow, Olivia said coolly, we have video of your mother pressuring the estate lawyer to rewrite the will, plus proof that the deed transfer on the vineyard was fraudulent. Sophie froze. Elise stepped forward. You lied to my face for 10 years. You took something I was meant to grow with, meant to inherit. Do you have any idea what that vineyard meant to me? Sophie's eyes darted. I didn't want to hurt you. Yes, you did, Elise said sharply. You just didn't want to be caught. And for the first time in their lives, Sophie had no words. The cabin, once a painful symbol, became Elise's refuge. She returned there every weekend, sanding the floors, opening windows that hadn't seen light in years, stacking her father's journals in chronological order on the old bookshelf. But something in her couldn't shake that email from Declan Rhodes. So one night, with the fireplace crackling and a hot mug in hand, she opened it. Subject: Your father wasn't the only one who tried to fight them. Elise, I've been researching the Marrow family for years, quietly, carefully. I'm an independent journalist now, but back then, I worked for the Ledger when your mother tried to have an internal story killed. Your biological mother. Her name was Lena Royce. She was a nurse at St. Alden's, where your father served on the board. Meredith had her blacklisted. The adoption wasn't as clean as the court documents suggest. If you're ready for the truth, not just about the estate, but about where you really came from, I can help. Declan Rhodes, 555-927-1182. Elise stared at the screen, heart pounding. Lena Royce. A name she'd never heard but suddenly couldn't stop repeating under her breath. She picked up her phone, dialed. 3 rings. Then, Declan Rhodes. Her voice was hoarse. This is Elise Marrow. I was hoping you'd call, he said, calm and warm. I want to meet. In person. A pause. I'll drive up tomorrow. The next day, Elise sat across from Declan at a coffee shop tucked between 2 antique stores in a quiet coastal town. He was younger than she expected, Early 40s, lean, weathered eyes, dressed in jeans and a threadbare blazer. He had a notepad, but he didn't open it. "Thank you for coming," he said sincerely. "I need you to start at the beginning," Elise said. "Who was she?" "Lena." He nodded. "She was your biological mother. She had a short relationship with your father while he was separated from Meredith. You were the result." Elise's world tilted again. "She died when you were still a baby, under suspicious circumstances. I've spent years trying to piece together what happened, but records were wiped. She left behind a journal. I have it." He slid a battered notebook across the table. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was the unmistakable handwriting of a young woman. Raw, hopeful, heartbreaking. "He says he loves me, that he'll leave her. I believe him. I have to believe him, because I can't do this alone." "They came today. Meredith and someone from the board. Said I was unstable, took my badge. I know what this is. She wants me gone. If anything happens to me, please let Elise know I tried to fight." Tears streamed silently down Elise's cheeks. Her hands trembled around the soft edges of the journal, her fingers brushing each page like a sacred relic. "You said her death was suspicious?" she whispered. Declan nodded. "They ruled it an overdose, but the coroner's office flagged inconsistencies. And then suddenly, the file was sealed." "And you think Meredith—" "I think Meredith knew exactly what she was doing. And I think she did everything in her power to erase Lena from history, including taking you and raising you under her thumb." That night, Elise sat in the cabin with two journals, one from her father, one from her real mother, spread open on her lap. Each filled in the missing halves of her story, and all around her the silence no longer felt lonely. It felt like purpose. She pulled out her phone and texted Olivia, "We're adding wrongful adoption to the lawsuit." At the Marrow estate, Meredith stood at her bedroom window, arms crossed, watching the wind bend the trees in the garden. "She's digging," she muttered. "She's not going to stop," Will said behind her. "I know," Meredith replied, voice flat. Then she turned slowly. "But if she wants to bring the family down, she'd better be prepared for the fire." Elise was done surviving. She was done carrying silence on her back like inheritance. With every truth uncovered, a new weight lifted, and a new war began. The lawsuit had already rattled Meredith's foundations, but with Lena Royce's journal in hand, Elise was preparing to take things further. Olivia Dalton had warned her, wrongful adoption was nearly impossible to prove this many years later, but Elise didn't need a courtroom to ruin Meredith's carefully curated legacy. She just needed the truth. And now, she had both the motive and the mother's voice from beyond the grave. "I want to go public," Elise said the next morning in Olivia's office. Olivia blinked. "Are you sure?" "I'm not just suing them. I'm exposing them. This whole town needs to know what she did, what she took, and who she destroyed to protect a lie." Olivia leaned forward, fingers tapping her legal pad. "Then we release it on your terms, an exclusive. You pick one outlet, one journalist, total control of the narrative." Elise nodded slowly. Declan. 2 days later, a video interview went live. Title: The Fourth Key, Elise Marrow's Truth. Subhead: A daughter stolen, a legacy manipulated, and a journal that couldn't be buried. The footage was raw. Elise sat in the lakeside cabin, lit by the soft gold of sunset through open windows. Her voice didn't waver as she told the story, how her father had tried to protect her, how Meredith twisted her presence into a family liability, and how Lena Royce's name was all but erased. She held up Lena's journal at the end. "I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing it for every daughter told she wasn't enough, for every woman erased so another could shine. Meredith Marrow didn't just steal my inheritance. She tried to steal my identity, but I've found it again, and now I'm not hiding." Within 24 hours, the video had over 800,000 views. Within 48, Elise's inbox overflowed with messages, some sympathetic, some vengeful, and many from women with similar stories of hidden adoptions, inheritance theft, and family betrayal. She wasn't alone. And that terrified Meredith. At the Marrow estate, Sophie hurled her tablet across the kitchen floor. The video paused mid-sentence as Elise's steady voice hung in the air. "She's going to destroy us," Sophie hissed. "No," Meredith said, pacing. "She's going to destroy me, and if I go down, I'll take you both with me." Will sat in silence, elbows on the table, head in his hands. "What if she sues for criminal charges?" he asked quietly. "She won't. She wants the estate. She doesn't want prison." Sophie looked up. "Are you sure?" Meredith turned to face them, eyes sharp. "It's not Elise we need to worry about. It's the people watching her, the ones whispering, the ones ready to believe her side." Back at the cabin, Elise received a text from a blocked number. "Meet me, 1 hour, old greenhouse, no police." No name, no explanation. The old greenhouse was on the edge of her grandfather's former property, abandoned now, choked with ivy and dust. She hesitated only a second before grabbing her coat and heading into the night. The greenhouse door creaked open, vines crawling down like green webs. "Hello?" Elise called. A figure stepped out from behind an old tool rack. Will. "Why are we meeting like this?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "I had to do it this way. If Meredith knew I was talking to you..." He looked down. "I just need you to know. I'm sorry." "You knew," she said, "about the adoption, the vineyard, everything." He nodded. "She told me it was for the best, that you wouldn't understand, that you were too fragile to handle the family business." "I was never fragile," Elise said. "I know that now," he replied. Will stepped forward and handed her a folded paper. "I found this in her study. She was planning to transfer everything to an offshore trust. If she does that, you won't be able to touch a cent, no matter how the court rules." Elise opened it. Swiss bank account. Trust transfer. Scheduled for next week. "I don't know what to do," he said. "You just did," she replied. That night, Elise and Olivia filed an injunction to freeze all Marrow family assets. By morning, Meredith's accounts were locked. Her charity donations rejected. The trust transfer halted. And the phone call that followed wasn't a scream. It was a snarl. "Elise," Meredith said through gritted teeth, "you're making a mistake." "No," Elise said, calm. "I'm correcting yours." "You'll regret this. I made you." "No," Elise whispered. "You took me, but I made myself." She ended the call, but something in her gut twisted after. Not fear, a feeling like unfinished business, because someone still hadn't spoken. The man who stayed in the shadows, who passed her the warning, who remained silent while everything was taken. Elise texted Will one word. "Why?" He didn't answer right away, but when he did, it was a single line. "Because I owe you more than an apology. I owe you the truth. Meet me at Dad's grave." The grave sat beneath a weeping willow at the edge of Marrow Hill Cemetery, overlooking the town Andrew once tried to protect, and the family that tore itself apart beneath its polished smiles. Elise stood alone for a while, her coat pulled tight against the early evening chill. The last of the sun melted through the clouds, gilding the grass in copper and gold. Her father's headstone was simple, Andrew Whitman Marrow. A man who saw too much, spoke too little. 1956 to 2025. She bent down, brushing a few leaves from the marble, then looked up as footsteps approached. Will, no tie, wrinkled shirt, something broken in his shoulders now, like a man whose inheritance had finally been named. Guilt. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, staring at the stone. "I used to think he was weak," Will said finally, "for letting Mom run over him, for never standing up." Elise's eyes stayed forward. He wasn't weak. He was trapped. Will nodded slowly. "You were right. About everything. I helped them because I thought if I stayed loyal, I'd be spared. But all I did was become part of the lie." She turned to him. Why now? He pulled an envelope from his coat. Elise, Dad didn't just leave you that key, he left you this. Inside, a final letter, not typed, not in a journal, just plain folded paper, his handwriting slightly shakier, the ink smudged near the bottom. My Elise, if you've made it here, it means you chose to fight. I'm proud of you. I couldn't stop Meredith, but I could build the map, and I knew you'd find the way through it. You always had more strength than you realized. There's one thing you don't know yet. The Vineyard? It was never just about land, it was Lena's. She bought it before you were born, registered it in your name after. Meredith forged the transfer, but there's an original deed, locked in the notary safe at Northbridge Trust. Your name is still on it. Take back what's yours. Not just the Vineyard, but your name, your story. Love always, Dad. Elise folded the letter, eyes stinging. Thank you, she said to Will. But he wasn't done. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said, but I've started working with Olivia. I'm testifying, and I'm walking away from the estate. Elise studied him. The man who once looked the other way had now turned back to face the fire. Maybe this time, she said softly, we all get to start over. 6 weeks later. The courtroom was packed. Meredith sat stiff and silent, designer suit perfectly pressed, hair flawless, but her eyes wild beneath the mask. Sophie wasn't beside her anymore. She hadn't shown up at all. Rumors said she'd moved to Charleston with a quiet payout, far from the media frenzy. Will sat with Elise. And when the judge ruled the estate had been fraudulently altered, when the Vineyard was restored to Elise and damages awarded in full, there was no applause. Just silence. And then the soft exhale of justice, finally delivered. Later, Elise returned to the Vineyard. She walked between the rows, fingers brushing the vines just beginning to wake for spring. Lena had walked here once, maybe her father too. It wasn't just land, it was legacy, reborn. She turned toward the house on the hill. Renovation had started. Fresh paint, new windows. Her studio was set to open there in the fall. A place for stories like hers, for women like Lena, for daughters like herself. She paused, closed her eyes, and listened to the wind move through the vines. Not just a key, a door, and Elise had finally walked through it.